I can feel my hands shaking as I wipe down the kitchen counter, pretending to be focused on some imaginary spot that needs cleaning. My heart is pounding so hard, I swear Mark must hear it from down the hall. His footsteps are getting closer and I hold my breath. God, we've been building to this for months now. Every morning, I'd come down to breakfast, playing the perfect stepdaughter while feeling his eyes follow me. I started wearing the little silk shorts he seemed to notice, letting my hair fall loose the way that makes his gaze linger. The tension has been killing me. I hear him pause in the doorway. Lily. Just my name and his deep voice makes heat pool in my belly. I grip the edge of the counter, still facing away as his presence fills the kitchen. The air feels electric between us. We shouldn't, I manage to whisper, but I'm already arching back slightly, drawn to him like a magnet. He's so close now I can smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating off his body. His fingers brush my bare shoulder and I shiver. I turn around slowly, my back against the counter as I finally meet his eyes. They're dark with hunger, and something else, a tenderness that makes my chest ache. His thumb traces my bottom lip, and I part them instinctively. The way you look at me, he murmurs, like you can see right through me. He moves closer, pressing me back against the granite, strong arms caging me in. My pulse is racing as his face dips towards mine. We both know there's no turning back now. This thing between us was always meant to happen. Let me rewind to how me and my stepfather got to this magical moment. It sounds crazy, but hear me out. I heard the rumble of Mark's truck in the driveway and glanced at the clock on my phone. He was home right on time, as always. I didn't even have to look out my window to know what was happening. He'd sit in the truck for a minute or two, maybe 3, gathering himself before coming inside. I used to think it was weird, but now I get it. Living with my mom isn't exactly a walk in the park. I flipped to a clean page in my sketchbook and tapped my pencil against the paper, trying to figure out what to draw. I didn't hear the front door open yet, so I had time. Mark would probably come in quietly, call out a soft hello, and get to work making dinner. He's like that, quiet, steady, kind of the opposite of my mom. Mom's a force of nature, loud, sharp, and always moving. She works as a project manager for some big corporate company, which means she spends her days bossing people around and meeting impossible deadlines. When she comes home, it's like she doesn't turn it off. She treats Mark like one of her employees, always barking orders or nitpicking the way he does things. He doesn't fight back, not really. He just sort of takes it, which makes me feel sorry for him. I don't think I've ever said that out loud before, but it's true. The truck door slammed shut, and I could hear the crunch of gravel under Mark's boots as he walked to the door. I put down my pencil and leaned back on my bed. A few years ago, I probably wouldn't have cared. I would have kept to myself, my nose buried in a book or my sketch pad, pretending not to notice the tension in the house. But lately, it's harder to ignore. It's not like I've got some picture-perfect family history to compare this to. My dad left when I was 10, and even before that, he wasn't exactly winning Father of the Year awards. He was around, but not really there, you know? When the divorce happened, he moved a couple of states away and started a new life. I get a birthday card every year, sometimes a call on Christmas, but that's about it. Mom says it's better this way, less drama, less chaos, but I'm not so sure. The front door opened, and Mark's voice called out, "Hey, I'm home!" He sounded cheerful, like he always does. I don't know how he manages to keep that up. If I were him, I'd probably have snapped by now. "Lily?" he called again, this time a little softer. "I brought tacos for dinner." I rolled my eyes and smiled, even though he couldn't see me. Mark was like that. He remembered the little things. Mom wouldn't have thought twice about what I liked for dinner, but Mark? He made a point to remember my favorite taco shells, the ones that crunch just right. And I wandered into the kitchen and found him unpacking groceries on the counter. His plaid shirt was a little wrinkled, and there was sawdust clinging to his jeans, probably from the school workshop where he taught. "Hey, Lily," he said when he saw me. His smile was easy and warm, like he was genuinely happy to see me. "Hi," I mumbled, leaning against the doorway. I wasn't great at small talk, but Mark didn't seem to mind. Guess what's on the menu tonight? He asked, holding up a box of taco shells like it was some big secret. I shrugged, pretending not to care. Tacos? Bingo, you're good at this game. He grinned and started lining up the ingredients. Lettuce, cheese, ground beef, and that salsa I liked. He worked quickly, like he wanted everything to be perfect before Mom came downstairs. I stayed quiet, watching him. He didn't seem to notice, humming softly under his breath as he unpacked. It was one of those little things about Mark that made me like him, even if I'd never admit it. He didn't try too hard, didn't force himself into my space like some other stepdads might. He just was. How was school? He asked, breaking the silence. It was okay, I said, which was my go-to answer for pretty much everything. School was fine, not great, not terrible. Just there, like most things in my life. Mark nodded like that was enough for him. He didn't push, didn't ask a million questions like Mom always did. I think that's why I started talking to him more lately, because he listened without trying to fix everything. I grabbed a stool at the counter and sat down, watching as he chopped tomatoes with the kind of focus you'd think he was performing surgery. You know, you don't have to go all out every time you make dinner, I said. He looked up, surprised, then laughed. Taco night's special, he said. Besides, I figured you could use a break after school. Bet art class was rough today, huh? I blinked, caught off guard. He remembered that art was my favorite subject. It wasn't too bad, I said, a little softer now. I've been working on this bird drawing. It's coming out okay, I guess. I bet it's great, he said, like he really meant it. You'll have to show me sometime. Maybe, I muttered, but I was smiling now. That's how it was with Mark. Simple. Easy. I couldn't say the same for my mom, whose sharp voice rang out upstairs as she talked on the phone, probably arguing with a coworker. I knew it was only a matter of time before she came downstairs, and the calm in the kitchen would disappear. But for now, it was just me and Mark, and for once, it felt like maybe this house could be a home after all. I watched Mark as he chopped the tomatoes, his knife moving methodically, like he was putting every ounce of focus into the task. It wasn't just dinner for him. It was an offering, a peace treaty for a battlefield he never signed up to be on. I wondered, not for the first time, how he ended up here, standing in a kitchen where the walls always seemed to hum with tension, married to a woman who barely seemed to see him anymore. But then, I guess life doesn't always go the way you plan. I thought about how I ended up here too, perched on this stool, silently rooting for a man who wasn't even my real dad. It was 2 years ago when my dad left for good. The official story was that he had a new opportunity in another state, but even at 12, I knew what that really meant. He wanted out. Mom told me as much one night when she was 3 glasses of wine in, her voice sharp and bitter. Your father doesn't know how to stick around when things get hard, she'd said, and I didn't argue. How could I? He hadn't even fought for joint custody. The first year after he left was a blur of slammed doors, muffled arguments between Mom and her lawyer, and me trying to shrink into the background. Mom threw herself into work, burying her emotions under deadlines and spreadsheets, while I kept to myself, retreating into my sketchbooks. We got by, but we weren't a family anymore. We were just 2 people living in the same house, trying not to fall apart. And then Mark showed up. Mom met him at some corporate event she'd been dragged to by a coworker. I remember the first time she brought him over for dinner. He was polite, quiet, and awkward in a way that made me feel sorry for him. He spent most of the meal trying to win Mom over with stories about his students or the projects he was working on in his shop class. She barely looked up from her phone, but I could tell he liked her, really liked her. When they got married a year later, I didn't say much. I didn't have a choice, really. Mom was happy, or at least she seemed happy, and I wasn't about to ruin it. I figured Mark would be like my dad, there when it was convenient, gone when it wasn't. But Mark wasn't like that. He stuck around, even when it probably would have been easier to leave. You want to help me with this? Mark's voice pulled me back to the present. He was holding out a bag of shredded cheese, his eyes warm and patient. Sure, I said, sliding off the stool and joining him at the counter. I opened the bag and started sprinkling the cheese into a bowl, trying not to think about the sound of Mom's voice upstairs, still sharp and irritated as she argued with whoever was on the other end of the line. "You're getting good at this," he said, nodding toward the bowl. "Chef Lily in the making." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling. "It's just cheese, Mark." "Hey, every great chef starts somewhere," he said with a grin. I didn't say it out loud, but moments like this were why I'd started warming up to him. He had this way of making me feel like I mattered, even in the smallest ways. My dad never did that. Whenever he was home, it was always about him, his job, his hobbies, his plans. I was just the kid he had to take care of because it was part of the deal. But Mark showed up. He asked questions. He listened. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and tacos. There were plenty of nights when the tension between Mark and Mom felt like it was going to crack the walls. Mom had a way of tearing into him without even raising her voice, her words cutting deeper than she probably realized. Or maybe she did. "You really thought this was a good idea?" she'd asked him once after he spent hours building a new shelf for the living room. "It doesn't match anything in here. Did you even think about that?" Mark had just nodded, his jaw tight, and said he'd take it down. He didn't fight back. He never did. I wanted to yell at her that day, to tell her to stop being so mean to the one person who actually seemed to care about us, but I didn't. I stayed quiet, like always. I think that's when I started noticing the cracks, not just in their marriage, but in Mark himself. He'd come home from work, tired but still trying, and Mom would brush him off like he wasn't even there. I don't know how he put up with it. Maybe he was used to it, or maybe he thought he could fix it, the way he fixed everything else. "Hey, what's on your mind?" Mark asked now, his voice breaking through my thoughts. "Nothing," I said quickly, but he gave me that look, patient, curious, like he actually cared. "Come on," he said, leaning against the counter. "You've got that look you get when you're thinking about something serious. Spill." I hesitated, my fingers picking at the edge of the cheese bag. Do you ever wish you hadn't married Mom?" The question hung in the air, heavier than I meant it to be. Mark didn't answer right away. He set the knife down and leaned on the counter, his eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes," he admitted softly, and my chest tightened. "But not because of you, Lily. Never because of you." I looked down at the counter, my face hot. "I didn't mean—" "No, it's okay," he said quickly. "I know what you meant. And the truth is, yeah, things are hard sometimes. But I'm here because I want to be. Because I care about this family, even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. For a moment, the kitchen was quiet again, except for the sound of Mom's voice upstairs. But this time, it didn't feel so heavy. It felt okay. Mark smiled at me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. Like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be all right after all. I don't think Mark or Mom knew I was awake that night. It was late, way past the time I was supposed to be asleep, but I'd been lying in bed, sketchbook forgotten on my nightstand, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the ways the day had gone wrong. Mom had been in one of her moods, snapping at Mark over something dumb, like the way he folded the laundry. He didn't argue back. He never did. That was Mark's thing, patience. But even patience has its limits. I heard the argument start as a low hum, muffled by the walls of their bedroom. It wasn't unusual. They argued often enough that I'd started tuning it out most of the time. But tonight was different. Mom's voice was sharper than usual, cutting through the quiet, and for the first time, I heard Mark's voice rise in response. It startled me. He never raised his voice. Ever. "I'm trying, Susan," he said, his voice strained. "I do everything I can to make this work, and nothing's ever good enough for you." "Oh, don't play the victim," Mom shot back, her words dripping with disdain. You think cooking dinner and fixing shelves makes you some kind of hero? This family needs more than that, Mark. This family? He repeated, and there was a crack in his voice that made my chest tighten. I've done nothing but try to be there for you, for Lily, and all I get in return is… You're not her father, Mom cut in, her words landing like a slap even from where I was lying. The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like my chest was being squeezed by something I didn't understand. Mark didn't say anything after that. Not for a long time. And when he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter, softer, but somehow heavier. I know I'm not her father, he said, but I love her like she's my own, and I wish you could see how much I care about both of you. I didn't hear the rest. I pulled the blankets over my head, trying to block out the sound of Mark's hurt voice and Mom's cutting replies. But the words were already in my head, circling like vultures. I'm not her father. I'd never thought about it like that before. Mark didn't act like he wasn't my dad. He was more of a dad to me than my real one ever was. The next morning, I couldn't look at Mark without hearing his voice from the night before, the way it had cracked when he talked about loving me like I was his own. I wanted to say something, to tell him I'd heard, to tell him it mattered, but I didn't know how. Words always felt stuck in my throat when it came to things like that. Instead, I started watching him more closely. The way he'd bring me my favorite snacks when I was working on a drawing. The way he'd remember little things, like how I hated when people talked during movies. The way he'd smile at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like he was just happy I was there. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Compassion. Not the kind you feel when you see someone trip and spill their coffee, but something deeper. It was the kind of compassion that made my chest ache, that made me want to help him somehow, even if I didn't know how. It wasn't long after that night that I started dreaming about Mark. Not weird, creepy dreams, but quiet ones. Intimate in a way I didn't expect. In one dream, we were sitting on the porch swing, just the two of us, watching the sunset. He was telling me a story about his childhood, something funny about a treehouse he'd built that collapsed the first time he climbed into it. I remember laughing in the dream, feeling warm and safe, like nothing bad could touch us. In another dream, I was in his workshop at school, watching as he showed me how to use some kind of saw. His hands were steady, guiding mine, and I remember feeling proud, like I was finally good at something he cared about. The dreams didn't feel like regular dreams. They felt like pieces of a life I wanted, but didn't know how to reach. When I woke up, I felt this overwhelming need to do something, anything, to show him I cared. The next time Mom snapped at Mark, I didn't just sit there and pretend not to notice. It was over something stupid again, like how he'd left his boots by the door instead of putting them away. It's not that hard, Mark, she said, her tone dripping with frustration. You live here too, you know. Mom, it's not a big deal, I said, my voice louder than I meant it to be. Both of them looked at me surprised. He just got home. It's not like the boots are hurting anyone. Mark's face softened, and for a second, I thought he might actually cry. Mom just frowned and shook her head, muttering something under her breath as she walked away. But I didn't care. I'd done something, and for the first time, I felt like I was on his side. After that, I started looking for little ways to make things easier for him. I'd help with dinner without him asking. I'd leave my drawings on the counter for him to see, knowing he'd always say something nice about them. I'd even laugh at his dumb jokes just to see him smile. And in those moments, I realized something. Mark wasn't just my stepdad. He was my family. Maybe the only real family I had left. It started as a small shift, tiny, almost imperceptible changes I made that I told myself were no big deal. A pair of shorts that felt just a little too short. A tank top that Mom always called inappropriate, though I never really thought it was until now. At first, I convinced myself it was because summer had come early, and the heat was unbearable. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the real reason. The truth was, I wanted Mark to notice me. I wasn't sure when it started or why. Maybe it was after I overheard that argument between him and Mom, when his voice cracked with something raw and vulnerable as he said he loved me like I was his own. Or maybe it was the way he always paid attention to the little things, like how I liked my tacos or what art supplies I was running low on. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth paying attention to, and that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about trying to replace Mom, or even trying to get his attention in a way that crossed any lines. It was just about being seen, noticed, acknowledged. For once in my life, I wanted someone to really see me. Not as a kid or as a problem to solve, but as me. The first time I came downstairs in one of my tank tops, the kind Mom had always told me was too revealing, I tried to act casual, like I hadn't thought twice about it. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, his coffee mug in one hand and the morning paper spread out in front of him. He glanced up when I walked in, his eyes flickering over me for just a second before he smiled. "Morning," he said, his voice as warm and steady as always. "Morning," I mumbled, heading for the fridge to grab the milk. I kept my back to him, pouring cereal into a bowl, like I didn't notice the way his gaze lingered on me just a moment longer than usual. It wasn't anything weird, not really. He wasn't ogling me or anything like that. But he noticed, and that was all I wanted. As I sat down at the table, I caught him stealing another quick glance, and it sent a strange warmth through me. It wasn't about making him uncomfortable or crossing any boundaries. It was about the way his attention made me feel seen, like I wasn't invisible in my own house. Over the next few weeks, I started testing things more. I'd wear a crop top when I knew I'd be hanging out in the kitchen while he cooked dinner. Or I'd roll up the waistband of my shorts just a little higher when we were sitting on the porch together. Sometimes I'd even pretend I couldn't find my sweatshirt and walk around in just a sports bra after coming back from a run. Mark never said anything, but I could feel the way he'd hesitate, like he wasn't sure where to look. He was always respectful, always careful not to let his eyes linger for too long, but I could tell he noticed. And every time he did, it gave me that same strange thrill, that feeling of being seen. But it wasn't that simple. Part of me felt guilty for even wanting his attention, for craving it in a way that felt different than before. Mark wasn't my real dad, but he was still my stepdad. He'd done nothing but try to help me, to make me feel safe and cared for. And here I was, pushing boundaries I didn't fully understand, trying to get him to notice me in ways that made my stomach twist with both excitement and shame. At night, I'd lie awake in bed, replaying moments from the day in my head. The way his eyes flicked to my legs when I curled up on the couch, or the way his voice caught just slightly when he asked if I wasn't cold without a jacket. I'd feel the warmth of his attention all over again, but it was always followed by a heavy weight in my chest. Was it wrong? Was I wrong for wanting this? For needing to feel like someone in this house cared about me? Really cared? Even if it meant walking a fine line between innocent and not so innocent? The feelings didn't stop when I fell asleep. In my dreams, Mark was always there, but not in a way that felt strange or wrong. It was comforting, intimate in a way that made me feel safe. Sometimes we'd be sitting on the porch swing, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. Other times he'd be in his workshop, showing me how to sand down a piece of wood or fix a broken hinge. In those dreams, there was no tension, no awkwardness, just a sense of belonging, like we were finally part of the same family. When I woke up, I'd cling to that feeling, wishing I could hold on to it longer. As time went on, I found myself wanting to give something back to him, even if it was small. I started doing little things to make his day easier, like cleaning up the kitchen without being asked, or leaving sticky notes on the fridge with doodles I knew would make him laugh. One day, I even cooked dinner for him, nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread. But the look on his face when he walked into the kitchen and saw me stirring the pot made it feel like I'd just won an award. "Wow, this is a nice surprise," he said, his voice warm and full of gratitude. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "It's not a big deal. I just thought you could use a break." "Well, I appreciate it," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder for just a moment before he went to grab plates. The warmth of his touch lingered long after he'd let go. The more I did these things, the more I started to understand what I really wanted. It wasn't just about Mark noticing me, or even about feeling seen. It was about finding a connection, a sense of family, in a house that often felt cold and distant. Mark made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't just some burden he had to deal with because he married my mom. And even if my methods weren't always the most straightforward, all I really wanted was to make him feel the same, to let him know that he mattered to me too. The house was unusually still that evening. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the kitchen as I stood by the counter, leaning against it while scrolling absent-mindedly on my phone. Mom had left that morning for her weekend work retreat, and the empty house felt quieter than usual. But not in a bad way. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel like you could finally breathe. I'd been in my room most of the day, sketching and trying not to think too much about Mark. He'd been in the garage working on one of his projects, the soft buzz of his tools drifting into the house every now and then. I wasn't sure why I felt so restless, why the thought of him just a room away made my heart feel heavy in my chest. Maybe it was because, for the first time, it was just the two of us. No mom, no tension, just us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to head to the kitchen and see if he'd eaten yet. I slipped on a tank top and shorts, telling myself it was just because it was warm. But as I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothing down the fabric of the top, I knew there was more to it than that. I wanted him to notice me, even if I wasn't sure why. I can feel my hands shaking as I wipe down the kitchen counter, pretending to be focused on some imaginary spot that needs cleaning. My heart is pounding so hard I swear Mark must hear it from down the hall. His footsteps are getting closer and I hold my breath. God, we've been building to this for months now. Every morning I'd come down to breakfast, playing the perfect stepdaughter while feeling his eyes follow me. I started wearing the little silk shorts he seemed to notice, letting my hair fall loose the way that makes his gaze linger. The tension has been killing me. I hear him pause in the doorway. Lily. Just my name and his deep voice makes heat pool in my belly. I grip the edge of the counter, still facing away as his presence fills the kitchen. The air feels electric between us. We shouldn't, I manage to whisper, but I'm already arching back slightly, drawn to him like a magnet. He's so close now I can smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating off his body. I turn around slowly, my back against the counter as I finally meet his eyes. They're dark with hunger, and something else, a tenderness that makes my chest ache. The way you look at me, he murmurs, like you can see right through me. He moves closer, pressing me back against the granite, strong arms caging me in. My pulse is racing as his face dips towards mine. We both know there's no turning back now. This thing between us was always meant to happen. I can hardly breathe as his face hovers inches from mine. The kitchen feels too small, too warm. His cologne mingles with the lingering scent of dinner, rosemary and something darker, masculine. We have to be careful, he whispers against my temple. Your mother. She's at her book club until 9, I breathe back. 2 more hours. His hands slide down my sides, memorizing every curve through my thin dress. I've worn it deliberately, knowing how his eyes followed me whenever I put it on. The fabric rustles softly as he presses closer. This is dangerous. The pet name makes me whimper. How long have I wanted him to call me that? Once we start... I know, I whisper. I've known for months. You've been teasing me, he accuses softly, nuzzling my neck. Those little shorts, the tighter tops. Maybe, I admit, tilting my head to give him better access. But you've been watching. I felt it every time. The kitchen timer dings suddenly, making us jump apart. Reality crashes back. The suburban house, the family photos on the walls, my mother's cardigan draped over a chair. But the electricity remains, crackling between us. Tonight, he murmurs, already stepping away. After she's asleep. I nod, smoothing my dress with trembling hands. We both know everything will change when darkness falls. For now, though, we return to our careful dance. Stepdaughter, stepfather, pretending our hearts aren't racing with anticipation of what's to come. but I catch his heated gaze as he leaves the kitchen and smiles secretly. In just a few hours, we won't have to pretend anymore. The way Mum treats him. It was my time to treat him how he should be. Let me tell you the moment she went to bed and he snuck into my room. The magic was unbreakable. Over the following weeks, Mark and I continued to share small, meaningful moments. When Mom was at work late, we'd sit together on the couch, watching TV or talking about nothing in particular. He'd ask about my art, genuinely interested in what I was working on, and I'd ask him about the projects he was building in the garage. It felt like we were building something too, a quiet bond that neither of us knew how to define. But it wasn't just the good moments that brought us closer. I could still see the way Mom treated him. Her sharp words, her dismissive tone, the way she seemed to forget he was even there sometimes. It made my chest ache in a way that was hard to explain, and I started to feel like I couldn't just sit back and watch anymore. One evening, after another tense dinner where Mom had snapped at Mark for something trivial, I made a decision. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see what was happening. I couldn't keep letting her treat him like that, not when I knew how much he cared about both of us. I found her in the living room later that night, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine in her hand. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Mom, can I talk to you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "What is it, Lily?" she said, her tone already laced with irritation. I hesitated, my fingers twisting together. "It's about Mark." That got her attention. She set her phone down and looked at me, her eyebrows raised. "What about him?" "I think you're too hard on him," I said, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess myself. "You treat him like he's just there, like he doesn't matter." Mom frowned, clearly not expecting this. "Lily, you don't understand how marriage works." "No, but I understand how people should treat each other," I cut in, my voice rising. "And the way you talk to him, it's not okay." For a moment, she just stared at me, her face unreadable. Then she sighed, leaning back in her chair. "He's an adult, Lily. He can handle himself." "But why should he have to?" I pressed. "He loves you, Mom. He loves me. And all he ever gets in return is criticism. Don't you see how much that hurts him?" Her expression softened, just slightly, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. "I'm not trying to hurt him," she said quietly. I've been under a lot of pressure." I nodded, my chest tightening. "I know, but he's not the enemy. He's trying to help you, to support you. You just have to let him." She didn't say anything for a long time, her gaze fixed on the floor. Finally, she sighed again, this time sounding more thoughtful than defensive. "Maybe you're right," she admitted. I'll try to be better." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small changes in the way Mom treated Mark. She started saying thank you more often, even for little things like him making dinner or fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom. She stopped snapping at him for every small mistake, and though her tone wasn't always warm, it was at least less sharp. Mark noticed the change too. One evening, after Mom had complimented the dinner he'd made, he looked at me across the table and gave me a small, knowing smile. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. One night, as Mark and I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset behind the trees, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You talked to her, didn't you?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. I couldn't just sit back and watch anymore. He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that made my chest feel full. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me," I said, my voice just as soft. "You deserve to be treated better. You deserve to be happy." He nodded, and for a moment we just sat there in comfortable silence, the swing creaking softly beneath us. Things weren't perfect after that. Mom still had her moments, and Mark still had his quiet, patient way of handling them. But the house felt lighter, like we'd all started to find a new rhythm. Mark and I continued to share our small moments, our secret understanding of each other. But it wasn't about boundaries or tension anymore. It was about connection, about family, about being there for each other in a way that felt real and meaningful. As I sat at the kitchen table one evening, sketching while Mark cooked dinner, I realized something. We weren't just a family by circumstance anymore. We were a family by choice, by the quiet moments and unspoken truths that tied us together. And that, more than anything, felt like home. And me and Mark shared our little secret for the rest of our lives.